I think I heard about you first. I was following Chris Potter's, activities. Every time he was playing with somebody new, I checked that person out, and it was around 2010 or 11 where I was checking who was playing at the Vanguard, and I saw Chris Potter was playing with a new quartet and had a young piano player. So I sent a friend of mine, because I'm not living in New York, I sent a friend of mine over there, and he recorded the concert secretly from me.
You sent the spy.
Yeah, he was a kind of a spy, and he sent me the recording, and then I really liked it. I thought you really brought something new to the current state of the scene and the piano in jazz in general, that from my perspective was kind of missing or not there before. I really liked that approach and still do, and so from that point on I made an effort to check out as much of your things that I could, and it's always very inspiring, and you always make me listen, and I really like that.
Thank you. If it was 2011, was the very first time I played with Chris at the Village Vanguard.
Larry Grenadier and Eric Harland, I think.
That's right. Yeah. That was basically a result of a record date that Chris did for ECM.
Yeah.
Called The Sirens.
Yeah.
And basically, it was a recording that had two keyboard players. He had Craig Taylor playing acoustic piano, and I was playing prepared acoustic piano, but I was also playing harmonium and celeste.
Yeah.
So yeah, those gigs came out of that project, because we were basically playing some of the same pieces that we recorded.
Yeah.
I played it at the Vanguard.
That state of playing with two pianos, that's something that happened a lot for you, right? I mean, in Threadgill's music also, right?
Right. It's interesting how that's happened. Henry, he had been talking for a while about doing something with a few keyboard players. And, I've been studying with Henry since I came to New York. That was one of the main reasons I moved to New York. I received a grant from the Canada Council for the Arts to study composition with Henry. So when I came here, I was basically just, hanging out a lot with Henry and, studying with him, going to a lot of shows and checking out a lot of music and taking a look at his music and his ideas. So when a couple of years went by, maybe 2-3 years, and he started getting some ideas about doing something with keyboard, which is something that's not that common for him.
Yeah.
To use keyboard instruments. So I guess just the timing was right. He put together a band with myself and a few of my peers, like Craig Weingrip, fantastic drummer here in New York, and Roman Filiu, who's also from Cuba, is from the same town that I'm from, Santiago de Cuba. But he's been living here now in New York for a few years. Also Curtis McDonald, Chris Hoffman, who's in Henry's band, and Liberty Eldman.
Did you hip him to those guys, to your peers? Or did he know them before? I was wondering about that when I was listening to the records. Like, it seems like it's coming from a very young scene that he might have been checking out, or were you also suggesting people to him?
It was a combination of things. Basically, I would be playing a lot with Craig and with Roman and Curtis. So sometimes, Henry loves coming out to shows and checking out what's happening in the city. So he would see me playing with them, and that's, I was kind of the introduction for Henry to that particular group of musicians, And then when Henry got the idea to create that group, the connections were already made, like we were already, hanging out with Henry and talking about music, And the same thing with Jason, Henry has been a fan of Jason's playing for a long time, and he wanted his voice to be part of that group. So that's kind of how that happened. He came out to see some shows, and he became interested in their playing and what they had to say as artists. So it was a completely natural process that happened, out of us, having a friendship and having a lot of similar interests in music.
When you studied with him, you said you talked a lot about music with him. Like, I was pretty late to the Henry Threadgill party, but when I started checking him out, I was completely amazed, and it's kind of a bit ashamed that I have been missing out before. This is so special music and so unique. I'm really interested in what you got from him when you were learning from him, when you were studying with him, stuff that you asked him specifically, and stuff that you always talked about, influences or like his working methods. What can you share about this?
Of course. I mean, with Henry, we talked a lot about everything related to music. You know, I mean, we still do, even though I'm not taking lessons like I used to. You know,
Yeah.
when I first got to New York, I used to go over to his house and we would get together, and for hours we'd be looking at different pieces of music, and we would play something for him, and it was more hands-on. Now it's not in that format anymore.
Yeah.
But we still talk a lot about music, and a lot of the questions that I had were related to composition, different things that he was doing with composition, with form, with harmony, rhythm, counterpoint.
Mhm.
I mean, I was interested in learning how it was that he was connecting, let's say, the spontaneous material that he was dealing with what was part of say, like a notated composition. I was interested in finding out how those things were related, and
Mm.
then I found out that the written material that he was coming up with was basically generated from a lot of the ideas that he had about improvisation.
It
And that's
sounds very
something
improvised.
yeah, but I mean, a lot of stuff is highly notated.
The notated stuff sounds as if like if Secret Being would improvise it, you know? It's going through a lot of players, right? But it
Right,
sounds
right, right,
spontaneous
right,
how it
right.
kind of finds the way to the listener. At least that's how it sounds to me.
Yeah. Also, he has different ways in which he likes to let's say open up the composition. You have something on paper, but how you make that come about in an ensemble, it's like different ways. Like, for example, there are different types of strategies that he has the players deal with to kind of create a spontaneous way of orchestrating the piece, at least in the sections that are dealing with improvisation. You see that sometimes a specific instrument is covering a certain range, and then sometimes those ranges are switched, with another instrument, or the area of the tonal range that a certain instrument is dealing with, that could be interchanged with someone else.
Mm.
Also, the amount of activity that's happening. You could have one instrument that's playing a lot of information, and then have someone else that's not playing as much, or dealing with, say, like a different kind of a feel or a different kind of articulation. You can have someone play legato and someone play staccato, and those things are interchangeable. So he kind of creates orchestration even in the improvised sections, because a lot of the things that happen within the improvisation are sometimes mapped out. So they're already kind of preconceived, as far as like what kind of texture is a certain thing going to have, or what kind of density
Yeah.
is it going to have, depending on how the players are interacting with each other and that kind of stuff. So, that really opened me up to a whole nother set of ideas and possibilities, as far as like what you can do with an ensemble.
Yeah.
In an improvisational context. So for me, it really had a deep impact on what I was doing, not only compositionally, but also conceptually.
Yeah.
Sometimes the lessons with Henry would be, let's go to, Yusef Lateef concert. Let's go to, Elliot Carter. For example, one time we went to see an Elliot Carter premiere of a piece that he wrote. And, a lot of times it was like that. He would take me that's how I got to meet a lot of the musicians associated with the ACM. We would go to the concerts that the ACM puts on here in New York. And that's how I got to meet Muhal. That's how I got to meet George Lewis. That's how I got to meet Roscoe Mitchell. Was all through Henry, so a whole nother world in music. I guess you could say, in, music as a way of living.
Yeah. Nice, man.
Yeah.
So is there specific stuff that you kind of consciously pull up again when you play, like specific things that he said are meaningful to you still, that you kind of have to
All the
remind
time.
yourself?
All the time, all the time. And like I said, a lot of things that Henry was talking about had to do with how do you train yourself to be able to see something meaning, in this case, any kind of musical material. How can you train yourself to look at that from all kinds of different angles?
Yeah.
So, for example, let's say you have a few bars of written music, and he would kind of take apart, like back engineer the way that something was put together, and then use those raw elements in creating something else out of that.
Yeah.
So a lot of things that I learned from Henry had to do with how to manipulate all the different parameters in music, so that you can generate material.
Yeah.
Whether it is rhythmic material or harmonic material, melodic, or different types of orchestration, different types of form that you can create out of being in that kind of mindset. Like how do you look at something without considering it final, without
Yeah,
considering
right.
it um, something that's solid, but something that's moving and alive.
Every idea has its own purpose, right? But yet sometimes it's not obvious from the start what the actual purpose might be or what other purposes of it might be, right?
Right. A lot of times was just was done as an exercise in being able to come up with something without necessarily having to, let's say, feeling inspired. So that's something that we're talking about a lot, and we were practicing a lot with music that I will bring for him
Hmm.
to look at, and obviously, of course, with his own compositions and with his own concepts.
I really admire in his music, or especially on the records that you are on, like it's a big ensemble of sometimes 14, 15 guys. Um,
Right.
and at times, almost everybody is playing at times, but it sounds, you can still see through everything. And everything is so, every idea is so conceived in a crystal clear way that although so much stuff is happening, it's
Yeah,
like
right.
everything has its place, although it's so complex. Right?
Well, one thing that I can tell you about those ensembles is that the group was made up of people that were already playing with each other and comfortable with each other. That already set us off in a direction so that we could start, playing at a certain level without even knowing the music. But then there were also a lot of rehearsals. I mean, that kind of situation where you're already playing with people that you feel in tune with already puts you at an advantage,
Yeah.
when it comes to putting together new music. And then, the rehearsals with Henry are not just let's read this music and let's try to get this right. I mean, he's changing the music up to the time of the performance.
Wow.
Keeps changing things. He'll change the form, or he'll say, okay, let's take the last two bars and play them backwards, and then go back to the third bar and loop the first three beats, and then go and play like this other bar. And so he's always changing things like that, and he almost like does it in purpose to kind of keep you in your toes.
Yeah.
He doesn't like anybody getting comfortable with the
Yeah.
music because he doesn't want people to play things that we've been conditioned to play. You know, he always wants everyone to be completely spontaneous with
Yeah.
the music. Putting that music together too, because I mean that's probably some of the most challenging music that I've ever had to play. It really took a lot of rehearsal
Yeah.
and just being in Henry's world, and knowing what he's hearing in certain sections and how he envisions certain things to jump off the page. And like he said, a lot of times, a lot of the players in the group are playing simultaneously, but everyone in the group has like very specific roles. Even in the improvised parts, it's not just you're free to do whatever you want. I mean, sure, you're free to do whatever you want, but at the same time, there are like certain kinds of, like I said before, strategies that you follow so that it works as a group and as a concept.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Everybody sounds very much on their toes. You know, it's
Yeah,
nice.
everybody in that group is definitely challenged.
Yeah, but it keeps the listener on his on their toes too. You know, in a way, like we're all also like, okay, what's going to happen next? I don't know what's going to happen next.
It's very unpredictable. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very unpredictable. Even for us, in the group, and after having played the music, even after a while, there's always that feeling of like, not feeling completely comfortable in a
Yeah.
way. And it's just embedded in the music, in the way that he writes music, and in the way that he approaches improvisation and composition in general.
Mm. How do you go about it when you lead a band, like on your recordings? Because when we talk about something like Gnosis,
Hmm.
there's a lot of written material also. Like how do you approach that in that kind of setting? Do you take the lessons that you learned from Henry, for instance, and do your own thing with it there? Or how do you approach it?
Yeah, I mean, when I approach making a recording, I'm really dealing with the totality of my experiences as a musician. So basically, everything that I've been exposed to from, starting with Henry or starting with Barry Harris
Yeah,
or spending time with someone like Stanley Cowell or,
yeah,
or playing in the different bands that I've been playing with for the last 10 years or even, all your experiences, at least for me, are coming to play. But definitely Gnosis was a project that but actually not only Gnosis but pretty much everything that I've done since I came to New York has been influenced by Henry. For example, the first recording I made when I got to New York was called Continuum, and it was something that featured Andrew Cyril and Ben Street. Ah, you have it. So yeah, that record is very influenced by Henry. All of them are really, they just happen to be dealing with specific things that I wanted to say and convey with these recordings. But he's had definitely a big influence on what I'm doing.
yeah. I was just
Yeah.
pointing out Gnosis because it's a bigger ensemble, and you wrote
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah,
written
for
material
sure.
for it. This is why I made the connection. Of course, we're always the result of everything that happened to us before, and
For sure. Yeah.
it's also very subconscious how every musical situation triggers another influence and another
Right.
combination of influences also, and sometimes you wonder where it all comes from.
No, for sure. And you're completely right. When I first finished my first drafts of Gnosis, Henry was one of the first people that I showed it to. I
Mm,
showed it to Henry, and I also showed it to Mohan Richard Abrams.
mm,
I showed it to him, and we discussed it. We talked about the music, certain things that they saw in the music, and certain ideas that they had about what I was trying to do, and it's definitely a big inspiration and a huge influence on the music itself. He actually came when the first rehearsal that I had, like about a year before we went into the studio, because I wanted to work on the music ahead of time, so I got together with the players and we did a rehearsal just to run through the music, way before we went into the studio, just for me to, for one, to learn the music and also to see how it could be improved. So when Henry came to the first rehearsal, he had a lot of things to say, and it was just great, to have someone like Threadgill, just sitting there at your rehearsal and discussing at length, what the piece was about, what could basically happen with the piece, So
mm.
I'm very grateful for having someone like Henry, involved with my music.
It's amazing to have somebody like that sitting in your rehearsal, or who you can ask about your
Yeah,
compositions when you're writing and trying out stuff. I think that also takes a lot of courage on your behalf, because when you're writing something, that's usually also a very vulnerable process, right? And also other opinions and views, because everybody's going to have a view. There's the possibility of, interfering also with your subconscious and maybe intuitive way of dealing
of
with
course.
things. So is it something that you're doing very often, like asking somebody else, like for their view of your new written material? Or?
I usually don't. I usually don't. It just so happens that with Henry is a very special kind of relationship. He doesn't really judge. How can I explain this? He's not really judging my music in that, well, it could be better or worse. He's not really looking at it like that. But he's really just kind of making me aware of the potential that something might have.
Yeah,
It's not about, well, this is wrong or, this orchestration here is weak or he's not really coming from that place, His involvement with something, it's like, okay, how can I help you make something reach its
mm,
full potential, So and the same thing with Muhal, when I would get together with him, like he would come to some of my concerts and we would talk about the stuff, afterwards. And it was always positive. It never had to do with like, okay, well, you're doing this wrong, or there was
yeah,
nothing ever like that because to me, those are the perfect kind of teachers. Someone that knows that you're after something that's personal and that relates to your experience and who you are as a human being, and that can be helpful in bringing that to be the best that it can be,
yeah.
rather than saying, okay, well, you might need this, you might need that. It was never anything with Henry or Muhal. It's never been anything like that. When someone like Henry is looking at, I mean, I've even gone to concerts with Henry, and he's gone to concerts um, knowing that he's going to hear something that he might not necessarily completely enjoy.
Yeah.
But he feels like even in doing that, there's something to be learned from something that you don't feel connected to.
Yeah, that's deep. I don't want to focus too much on all of your heroes and teachers, but you've mentioned Barry Harris, and that's somebody I love too very much. He was on my list of stuff that I wanted to talk to you about. Now that you said the specific relationship you have with Muhal and Henry and their way of not judging and helping you achieve something's full potential, I'm wondering how you compare that maybe to your relationship with Barry Harris when you were studying with him, because I know from seeing a lot of his workshops and reading so much about him that he can be also very strict, like this is wrong and this is right. Not always, but in certain areas.
For sure.
How do you compare that to them then? I mean, or how is your relationship with him?
Barry's been very important in my development as a musician, and he's been absolutely beautiful with me, as a teacher and as a person. The reason that I went to see him was because of my love for the music of Bud Powell and Thelonious Monk and Barry's own music. So when I went to him and he sensed that I had a deep interest and a deep love for that music, it was all love, all love and completely open. The very first time I came to New York was to visit him, for a week here in New York, way before I moved to New York. So to have someone like that, just kind of show you around and say, well, you sit down at the piano, this is something that you need to check out, and, play rare tapes of Bud Powell and, just like being around someone that's part of the culture and someone that's from a certain generation is just, that's invaluable right there, and to this day he's one of my favorite pianists.
Yeah, same here. Yeah. When you said his touch, I want to know what he told you about, achieving that touch on the piano and what you got from that.
Well, when I first came to North America, I was basically playing the way that I was taught in Cuba, which was coming out of both the Cuban school of piano playing and also the Russian school of piano playing, which meant, at that point I was, just kind of playing everything with a kind of very percussive attack. And when I saw Barry play, I noticed that a lot of the lines that I heard someone like Bud Powell or Tommy Flanagan play, and a certain feel that they would get on the lines had something to do also with their technique and how they were, like the position of the hand and like certain movements and stuff. And Barry was basically talking about, which is that Horowitz in the back, your picture in the back?
There's Horowitz, yes, there.
That's Horowitz? Okay.
Yeah.
Because he was talking about playing flat finger. So if you watch a lot of the videos of Bud Powell and Monk, they're playing like that. They don't have the curl fingers. And the same thing with Horowitz actually. It almost looks as if they're not moving their fingers. And a lot of the movements are achieved through arm movements rather than independent movement of the fingers. So he would get me to do different types of exercises and stuff that eventually helped, I guess, my way of playing.
Can you exemplify them or tell me about the exercises?
Yeah, for example, he would get you to play a run, or he would get you to play, say, like a C major scale, like completely flat, So like, with none of these, and without playing each note.
Yeah.
More of a gesture. Yeah. Something that you achieve between, like a certain motion of your arm and your wrist, but no movement on from the fingers. So as least tension as possible on the actual hand and the fingers. Yeah. And everything smooth. Like sometimes he would get me to do a glissando on the piano. Just like a one finger glissando on the piano. And then he would get me to play a scale. And then he would say, see, the scale is supposed to sound like a glissando. That's how even it should be. I mean, if you're trying to play an even scale, you might be trying to do something else, but if you're trying to play an even scale, it should sound just as if you were playing a glissando, you know. So
Yeah,
that's something that's like, oh, okay, so
that's hard.
you know, just kind of, yeah, very hard, you know. And to this day, you know, I'm still working on it. And also, it really depends, you know, because sometimes I try to get a more percussive sound out of the piano
Sure,
and you
yeah.
know, different things that I'm trying to do with the sound of the piano. But he made me aware of all the sounds that you could get out of the piano by changing your touch. And he hit me actually to a book by Joseph Levine, which is Basic Principles in Piano Playing.
Mm.
I guess he at one point he checked that book out and he worked out of that book a lot because Barry studied with Sofia Rosoff, who was a prominent teacher here in New York, classical piano teacher, and I think a lot of pianists studied with her, Ethan Iverson and maybe Fred Hirsch. I have studied with her. I mean, she was very revered by many people, and I had the opportunity to go visit her one time with Ben Street actually, who took me over to see her. And I remember that Barry was studying with her, and I think maybe Walter Davis at one point too might have been going to see her. But for some reason, a lot of jazz pianists gravitated towards her. Yeah, she was incredible. She made me and Ben balance an egg on a plate. It was pretty it was pretty
Yeah,
hard
sure, yeah.
to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like your whole body and your whole mind had to like be focusing on this one thing. I think she was trying to get us to be aware of how your body and mind needs to challenge like a certain kind of energy and a certain kind of focus into making something happen.
Yeah.
At least that's what I got from it, you know, because he would say, okay, well, you know, what does it have to do with playing piano? Well, actually, it has everything to do with playing piano. You know, like how do you harness and focus your energy?
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
When I saw you play at our festival in Cologne, right before you went on stage, you asked if you could go do a little warm up in
Right.
another room. So I was
Right,
wondering,
right, right.
what do you usually do to warm up?
On tour, it's difficult because obviously you don't have access to a piano until you get to the venue. So when I warm up at the piano, I'm just basically trying to get my fingers going. You know, I'm trying to either go through, you know, a combination of scales, different exercises that I worked on over the years, from a few of the exercises out of the Brahms exercises book, and like different passages from like Chopin
Oh,
etudes
yeah.
and Czerny etudes, you know, just piano stuff to just kind of get my fingers going, especially if you solo piano, you know, which is very demanding for me. It really takes a lot of, you know, just time on the instrument.
What are you checking out or working on at the moment? Anything you'd like to share?
I've been trying to learn some classical Cuban repertoire. There are a few classical Cuban composers that I'm really interested in, and which I actually recorded some works on my latest recording. So I've been trying to learn some more of those pieces and um,
This is a composer called, do you know Montsalvatge?
yeah, Monsalvaje.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's Catalan.
Oh, he's Catalan. Why did I think
Yeah.
he's from Cuba?
Well, because I think he has
He has a
he has
piece.
some pieces
Yeah.
that have to do with Cuba. So that could be why.
Yeah, okay. But he has some beautiful music.
It's beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful. Another composer that I like as well from Catalonia is
Mompo?
Federico Mompou.
Oh man,
Mompou.
he's my favorite.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite composers.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I'm curious to, you know, now that I'm you know, making some music with flamenco musicians. I'm very interested in some of the harmonic devices that they use, you know, and some of those things you could hear in Mompou's music, and actually some of this music that I've been checking out from Cuba I was telling you about. You could hear some of the connections, not only rhythmic but also harmonic connections.
When I think about Mboko, your record, I was always amazed and fascinated with your choice of combining Thomas Morgan and Bob Hurst together. I love that. I love that idea. I love that idea.
Everybody asks me about that.
Oh yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you know, that came out of you know, just my love for, you know, for Thomas and Bob Hurst. You know, I just love both those guys. So when I had the opportunity to do something for ECM, for the type of music that I wanted to make, like I started thinking about different musicians that I wanted to have involved. And they immediately came to mind, and both of them being bass players. I was like, wow, that might be interesting, having them play together. And then, when we did the rehearsals for the recording. By the way, I was listening to the rehearsals the other day, and the rehearsals are actually very different from the recording.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, because we never played any concerts with that band. We just, we did the rehearsals and the recording, but
was the rehearsal and the recording, was it back to back, or was there some time in between?
No, it was pretty much back to back. I think we got together a couple days, and then right after we went into the studio.
Yeah.
You never really know how something is going to work, but as soon as the rehearsal got going, I was like, wow, this is really special,
Mm-hmm. How did they interact also, on a personal level with each other?
I think there was a lot of mutual admiration, and respect, from both sides. They were kind of jamming in the studio, playing blues and stuff, playing standards in the studio.
Yeah.
To bass. Yeah, it was wonderful. It was really a wonderful experience, and I love each of them for different reasons, because obviously there's such different players.
Yeah.
But now when I listen back to the recording, I'm really glad that I made that choice. I'm very happy with that choice. It was a good match of personalities, just having Marcus and, having Marcus on anything.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Or Roman on anything. I don't have a problem with that at all.
Yeah.
So,
sure. Not that the music is super similar, but I somehow was reminded of the vibe of Smokestack. Smokestack, the Andrew Hill
of course.
The vibe somehow went through. The music is different, obviously, and you write different stuff than Andrew, but I suppose Andrew is also an influence on your playing and writing.
Oh yeah, definitely, most definitely. He's one of my favorites. And Smokestack was definitely on my mind when we made that recording. Kind of by accident, actually. I mean, obviously, in Smokestack, you have two basses, but also I was particularly interested in figuring out how to make the percussion work with the two basses. When I mean percussion, I also include the drums and the piano. Funny enough, it's actually another recording by Andrew that I was thinking about when we made that recording, was called Compulsion, because there is percussion on that recording.
Oh, okay. I need to go back to that one.
Yeah. And, I was studying, that record and how to make it work, with the percussion and, and the two basses, because it could be tricky because, obviously the basses are, covering the same range. And the percussion sometimes could also cover some of the same range. So it took a little bit for me, just a little bit of figuring out, how to deal with that situation.
Talking about Andrew Hill, there was one moment in the concert at our festival in Cologne. You were quoting a song, and it drove me crazy because I actually had it on my mind for days after that concert. And you were quoting...
Of Andrews? A song of Andrews?
Yeah, you were playing Dusk,
Oh, Dusk. Yeah,
you were playing it was only like 10 seconds. And you played it, and I was like,
really?
shit, I know this song. What is it? What is it? And it was just a tiny moment, but it drove me crazy, and I thought, where do I know it from? And I didn't know the original version. I only knew a version by Frank Kimbrough.
I see. Okay.
So, and then I made the connection days after that, like, okay, and this is Frank. So I went through all the songs, all the records of Frank's that I had. Like, what is it? Where is it? And then I found it on a live recording of his. And then I found out, okay, it's not his song. Okay, whose is it? And then I found out it's Andrew Hill's song. And then I found out there's a record called Dusk.
Right. But the actual arrangement on that record comes from a solo piano rendition of that piece.
Okay.
From a live recording of Andrew's. It's called Le Trinitaire. And it's from a live show at Metz in France. There are two versions of the piece on that album. And there's one version, from what I understand from the lead sheet that I got from Johnny Bear and Eric McPherson, who played in Andrew's trio.
Yeah,
I can't remember now who actually wrote the arrangement that's on Dusk. But what they did was, like, a lot of those horn lines that you hear on Dusk.
That's him improvising.
Besides, that's from his solo, from the solo version. So
Wow.
what they did is they took some of those lines and they arranged it for that format. I think he had a front line of maybe 3 horns.
And
Yeah,
it's Scott
I
Colley
know the
and
rhythm section is Scott Colley and Billy Drummond.
Billy Drummond. Beautiful rhythm section. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They took the lines from the solo piano version, and orchestrated it for the
Mm,
horns.
beautiful.
That's what you hear on the actual recording dusk. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I love you should check out that solo record is one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, I'll
One of
check
my
it out
favorite
for
Andrew
sure.
records.
Oh great.
Yeah. But it was in my mind because I had just played it before we went on tour. I played a couple gigs with Eric and with John, and we played that piece, so it was fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
So I went into it. But I didn't remember that we played that we kind of played it a little bit.
Yeah. It's just
That's
a
funny.
tiny moment, but it's funny how those tiny moments of concerts or of records that can spark like a crazy surge like that for
Right,
other
right,
people.
right,
Like
right, right.
you don't think about that when you play, but that it can have such
Right.
an effect of somebody who can be driven crazy by just
Right, right,
tiny
right,
thing
right.
that you play. That's powerful.
Yeah, yeah,
And by the way, who sings
yeah.
on the old Locks record? There's a part 4. Somebody's singing very loudly and very full of
In
energy.
the very last part,
Yeah,
that's Henry.
that's him.
That's
Beautiful.
Henry conducting the band
Oh, right. Okay.
because he was in the room conducting the band as we played.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
yeah. Henry's like he's a force.
Yeah.
So that last section was very in performance. It would always make me cry because that piece he wrote for his late friend Butch Morris.
Mm.
So I got to meet Butch. I never got to play with him, but I got to hang out with Butch a little bit and know him a little bit through Henry.
Mm.
So playing the piece is always emotional. He's very expressive in his conducting of the piece. So when he gets to that part, he would start singing it.
That's how it sounds. I was like
Yeah,
somebody's into the music. I couldn't make out that it was him.
yeah,
But yeah.
yeah. He's not singing into a mic. He's just in the room
Yeah.
conducting the band. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. Listen, man, there's something that it's on my mind in the last couple of weeks. I've been trying in my playing to leave more space, and I'm really struggling with that. I think there are certain kind of temperaments in players, and there are people in a way who play too less in a way, and there are people who play too much. And I'm certainly in the second category. So I'm always trying to play less, and I'm struggling with it. And like we always say, don't think when you play because the music is too fast for it. You'll get left behind by the music because the music
Right.
will go on and you'll still think about the next thing you want to play, right? So
Right.
in that kind of time scenario, the time is fast. But what I'm thinking about is now when I'm trying to leave pauses, I'm leaving pauses, but they feel like eternities, right?
Have you recorded yourself?
That's what I'm getting at. I'm recording myself, and those eternities are super short moments. So, how can time be perceived and felt like that flexible? And I think you're very very good at leaving pauses in your playing. And I was wondering,
Wow,
what's your thought on that phenomenon of time and felt time? In regards to leaving pauses and playing.
Well, for me, there were a handful of musical experiences that, for one, made me really aware of that. The very first one was playing in Steve Coleman's band.
Mm.
I mean, just I was introduced to so many things, through playing in his band, but dealing with playing itself was a very different experience because sometimes I was expected to do things that are not expected from a piano player. For example, comping. The concept of comping within the context of Steve's band was very different. He would ask me to not play chords. He would ask me to comp with single lines or with rhythmic figures. Let's say the piece had a harmony. Like I could come up with like certain kinds of rhythmic figures, like clave-like rhythmic figures that were more percussive. Even if I wasn't playing the actual chord changes. I don't know if that makes sense, but with like clusters and stuff like that. And that really changed my whole perspective and my whole concept when it comes to comping. And that's something that I've been working on since then.
Yeah.
That was the first experience. Then fast forward to moving to New York, I had a chance to play with a band that Mark Turner put together. It was actually my very first time playing at the Village Vanguard, and that
With
was with Paul
Motion?
Motian.
Yeah, I was going to ask you
Yeah,
about that. I listened to the
yeah.
recording. Beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I wanted
So
to
that
ask
was
you how
another
that
thing.
felt. Yeah.
Oh man, that was life changing too,
Mm.
because everything that I played just didn't sound relevant at all in that situation. Playing with Paul, like everything he played sounded so matter of factly and so streamlined, like so pure. Like there was nothing extra in his playing.
Yeah.
He was like a master of what you're talking about. He was
Mm.
strictly dealing with expression. There was nothing flashy or extra about his playing. It was just what he needed to be when he needed to be. So that experience, like I said, I would play something and it would completely sound, right away completely stupid. So I had to like, no, seriously, that's really what happened. This was during the sound check
Mm.
because we didn't rehearse with Paul. We just did those gigs, but we didn't rehearse at all. I guess he didn't really like rehearsing. I guess especially at that time. I mean, it was just for one, it was just incredible to feel his sound and to experience his rhythmic feel. It
Yeah.
was very different, in comparison to anything that I had experienced before. Between the sound check and the gig, I was like, well, I'm gonna have to do something because everything that I'm playing sounds very stupid. So I'm gonna have to do something. I'm gonna have to do something because I'm obviously not cutting it. So during that week, I just learned so much, And one of the things that I learned was like, well, okay, so there are certain things that you've been conditioned doing things a certain way, and I was basically telling myself, well, you're gonna have to do something to get your hands to not do that because it's not really right now you're playing things that are not really coming from your
Yeah.
mind's ear. You're playing things that you have under your fingers. I was
Yeah.
like, well, that's not gonna work for every single musical situation that you're involved with, and that was proof. Here I was at the Village Vanguard playing with Mark's group with Paul Motion and Ben Street, and I just felt like everything that I was playing was inadequate. It was outside of the sound that was being made in that moment. So that week was really fantastic for me because I was able to work on on what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then also playing with Henry. With Henry, sometimes he'll say, okay, well, play rhythm. What he means by playing with rhythm, anyway, in the context of these groups with Henry that I've worked with, it means playing more activity and playing with a certain kind of touch, maybe like a little bit more staccato.
Mm.
He never told me that, but I figured that anytime that he would ask any of us to play rhythm and we would kind of address his request, he would respond to that the best. So that was another experience that was really important. And also something that he told me one time, he said, okay, well, how about you take a piece of music and you take all the events, you take, say, like all the notes that appear on the page and turn them into silence.
Wow.
And you take all the silences and turn them into notes.
Mm.
Just as an exercise. What I walked away with from that was that he was referring to almost thinking in terms of negative space. Like if you're familiar with the concept of negative space in photography and in film and stuff, I would basically try to get myself to hear things in my head and not play them,
Yeah.
by playing in between those things just as an exercise, and that was something that he hit me to. He's like, well, yeah, when you want to play something, stop it, don't play it at all, like
Yeah.
just don't play it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And try to play something in between,
It's almost like a
as an
counterpoint to your original idea, right? I mean,
right.
yeah.
Now that was an exercise, obviously when you're playing, it's impossible to, at least for me, it's impossible to rationalize things with that level of intellectual, because I mean that's what you do when you practice. You internalize things so that you can let them free
In the moment.
in the moment, spontaneously. And when I started practicing and working, like even just thinking about things like that, it just kind of opened up a whole nother sound for me. I mean, I don't know if that answers your question because it's really no short answer, but that just came to mind. That one little exercise that Henry told me about.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I mean, he gave me the example of doing it with something that was notated. He said, okay, well, you take something that's, in a piece of music and you turn the notes into silence and vice versa. But I was like, well, you could do the same thing without having to notate it, just mentally. It might not be exact, but it's the idea of
Yeah, yeah,
doing it that might ignite something different in your playing.
yeah. I want to thank you for being part of this.
Oh man, thank you. That's a wonderful thing you're doing, man. It's important. Like I say, we always get together, Henry and I and a lot of the people in that orbit, get together and talk about music, listen to music. But it's not common that people, record it and put it up online and stuff. We just do it for ourselves. But
This is why I'm doing it, because musicians, when we're on tour, we talk all the time about, and when we're not on
right,
tour, like you said, we talk all the time about music, but
right,
nobody gets to hear these stories,
right, right, right,
uh,
right,
those flights and sitting in the car, and you're sitting with somebody who has different experience than you and shares them with you. That's a learning
mm-hmm.
experience, right? And I always think when I'm talking to somebody, like now, if we would have sat here in my room, so many people would have missed out on all the great stories that you just told me, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
thought it would be nice to share that with other people. And then I just asked everybody I could think of that I would like to talk
Yeah.
about, and
Mm-hmm.
it has been a great experience. Yeah, like this one,
That's
man.
wonderful,
I really
man.
loved
That's
what
good.
you're saying, and these past days, I went back to a lot of stuff from you that I hadn't listened to for a while, and
Mm-hmm.
I really love your playing.
Man, thank you. Likewise, man. The admiration is mutual.
Mm.
I think you're a wonderful musician, and it's great, that we got to meet each other, and I'm so happy that we went to, played it at the festival.
Yeah, it's cool to
So,
have you here.
I hope we can keep building.